She stood in front of 30 second graders, her gentle voice explaining fractions with colorful blocks and patient smiles. The children saw only Miss Sarah, their beloved teacher who brought homemade cookies on Fridays and never raised her voice, even when Tommy accidentally knocked over the paint water for the third time that week. They had no idea that those same hands that now guided their pencils across worksheets had once held military-grade weapons in the darkness of enemy territory. The parents dropping off their children saw a soft-spoken woman in cardigans and comfortable flats, someone who remembered every birthday and always had Band-Aids ready for scraped knees. They couldn't have imagined that beneath that calm exterior lay the heart of a warrior who had completed one of the most grueling military training programs in the world, where less than 20% of candidates ever make it through. Sarah Mitchell looked like any other elementary school teacher in suburban Colorado. At 34, she had been teaching for 6 years, and her classroom was filled with the artwork and laughter of children who trusted her completely. But hidden in a locked box in her bedroom closet lay medals, certificates, and photographs that told a completely different story. One of midnight mission's life-or-death decisions, and a courage that had been tested in ways most people could never comprehend. This is the story of how a Navy SEAL became a second-grade teacher, and how her two worlds collided in a way that would change everything forever. Sarah Mitchell's alarm clock buzzed at 5 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 6 years. But, unlike most elementary school teachers, Sarah wasn't getting up early to prepare lesson plans or make copies. She was getting up to run 8 miles through the mountains surrounding her small Colorado town, followed by an hour of intense physical training in her converted garage. As she laced up her running shoes in the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah's mind drifted back to another morning, 12 years ago, when she had been jolted awake not by an alarm clock, but by the sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the Afghan night. She quickly pushed the memory away, focusing instead on the rhythm of her breathing as she stepped out into the crisp mountain air. The streets of Millbrook were still empty as Sarah began her run. She passed the coffee shop where she sometimes grabbed a latte before school, the park where her students played during recess, and the library where she often spent Saturday mornings reading stories to children. To anyone who might have seen her jogging through town, she looked like any other health-conscious teacher trying to stay in shape. They couldn't see the way her eyes constantly scanned for potential threats, or how she automatically noted every exit route and hiding spot along her path. Sarah had learned to compartmentalize her life with military precision. During school hours, she was completely Miss Sarah, patient, nurturing, and endlessly creative in finding ways to help her students learn. She decorated her classroom with bright colors and inspirational posters. She kept a drawer full of small prizes for good behavior and academic achievement. She knew which children needed extra encouragement and which ones required firmer boundaries. Her students adored her because she genuinely cared about each one of them. But the moment she walked through her front door each evening, another side of Sarah emerged. She would change out of her teaching clothes and into workout gear, then spend 2 hours maintaining the physical fitness and combat skills that had once been essential to her survival. Her home gym was equipped with everything she needed: weights, a heavy bag, pull-up bars, and various pieces of equipment that would have looked completely out of place in a typical teacher's house. Sarah's neighbors knew her as a friendly but somewhat private person. She would wave and smile when she saw them, and she always helped Mrs. Henderson next door with her groceries. But she never invited anyone over for dinner, and she politely declined most social invitations. People assumed she was just shy or perhaps a little antisocial. They had no idea that her reluctance to get too close to people was born from years of understanding that emotional attachments could be dangerous in her line of work, and that old habits died hard. The truth about Sarah's past was locked away as securely as the medals in her bedroom closet. She had been Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy, and one of only a handful of women to have successfully completed SEAL training. The program had nearly broken her, physically and mentally. For months, she had endured conditions designed to push candidates beyond their limits. She had carried boats over her head, swum in freezing water until her lips turned blue, and gone days with almost no sleep while instructors screamed insults and challenges in her face. Many of her fellow candidates had quit during Hell Week, that legendary 5.5-day period where trainees are allowed only 4 hours of sleep total while undergoing continuous physical and mental stress. Sarah had made it through by focusing on something beyond herself. The knowledge that somewhere in the world, American lives might depend on her strength and determination. When she finally earned her SEAL Trident, she was part of an elite brotherhood that numbered fewer than 2,500 active members worldwide. For 8 years, Sarah had served her country in ways that would remain classified for decades to come. She had been deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, and several locations that didn't officially exist on any mission reports. She had rescued hostages, gathered intelligence, and eliminated threats to national security. Her teammates had trusted her with their lives, and she had never let them down. She had been awarded the Bronze Star with Combat V, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, and several other decorations that recognized her exceptional service under fire. But the cost of that service had been higher than most people could imagine. Sarah had seen things that haunted her dreams and done things that weighed heavily on her conscience, even though she knew they were necessary. She had lost friends to IEDs and enemy fire. She had held dying teammates in her arms and made promises to wives and children that she sometimes struggled to keep. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive in combat zones now made it difficult to relax in civilian settings. She found herself constantly assessing threats and planning escape routes, even in the grocery store or at parent-teacher conferences. The decision to leave the Navy had not been easy. Sarah loved being a SEAL, loved the mission and the brotherhood and the knowledge that she was making a real difference in the world. But she had also begun to feel the cumulative weight of years spent in combat zones. She was tired of saying goodbye to people she cared about, tired of the nightmares that came with seeing too much violence, tired of carrying secrets that she could never share with anyone outside her unit. When her 8-year commitment was up, Sarah had made the difficult choice to return to civilian life. She had used her GI Bill benefits to get a degree in elementary education, drawn to teaching by desire to help shape young minds in a positive way. After years of dealing with the worst aspects of human nature, she wanted to spend her time nurturing the best aspects instead. Teaching had proven to be surprisingly therapeutic. Children were honest and uncomplicated in ways that adults rarely were. They trusted easily and forgave quickly. They found joy in simple things and approached each day with curiosity and enthusiasm. Being around them reminded Sarah of the innocence and hope that she had been fighting to protect during her years in the military. Her students had no idea that their soft-spoken teacher could field strip an assault rifle in less than 30 seconds, or that she had once spent 3 days hiding in enemy territory with a bullet wound her shoulder. They didn't know that she could speak fluent Arabic and Pashto, or that she had been trained in advanced combat medicine and explosive ordnance disposal. To them, she was just Miss Sarah, who made learning fun and always seemed to know exactly what to say when they were sad or scared. Sarah had been careful to keep her two worlds completely separate. She used her maiden name in civilian life and had never told anyone in Millbrook about her military service. Her teaching colleagues knew only that she had served in the Navy for a few years before deciding to go into education. She let them assume she had been in some kind of administrative role, and she never corrected their assumptions. The isolation was sometimes difficult. There were moments when Sarah longed to share her experiences with someone who could understand what she had been through. She missed the camaraderie of her SEAL team, the way they could communicate with just a look, and how they always had each other's backs. But she had made peace with her decision to keep her past hidden. It was better this way, she told herself. Safer for everyone involved. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, as Sarah finished her run and headed home to shower before school, she had no way of knowing that her carefully constructed double life was about to be shattered. In just a few hours, a crisis would unfold that would force her to choose between maintaining her cover and protecting the children she had grown to love. The woman who had once been one of America's most elite warriors was about to discover that some battles follow you home, no matter how far you run or how well you hide. Sarah grabbed a quick breakfast and gathered her teaching materials, just as she had done hundreds of times before. But this day would be different from all the others. This was the day that Miss Sarah and Lieutenant Mitchell would finally have to become the same person, and the children in room 15 would learn that sometimes heroes look exactly like the people you see every day. The morning started like any other Tuesday at Millbrook Elementary School. Sarah arrived at 7:30 a.m., unlocked her classroom, and began preparing for the day ahead. She wrote the date on the whiteboard in her neat handwriting, arranged the math manipulatives for the morning lesson, and double-checked that she had enough supplies for the afternoon art project. Her students would be creating paper plate masks, and she knew from experience that second graders could turn any craft project into a gloriously messy adventure. By 8:15, children were streaming through her classroom door with backpacks dragging behind them and sleepy smiles on their faces. Emma Rodriguez hugged Sarah's legs before hanging up her jacket, while Marcus Thompson proudly showed off his loose tooth. These small moments of connection were what Sarah treasured most about teaching. After years of life-or-death missions, there was something profoundly healing about helping a child sound out a difficult word or celebrating their excitement over mastering addition with regrouping. The morning progressed normally through reading groups and math centers. Sarah moved between clusters of students, offering encouragement and gentle corrections. She helped Aiden with his subtraction problems, praised Sophia for her creative writing, and reminded the table by the window to use their inside voices. To any observer, she was the picture of a dedicated elementary teacher completely absorbed in her students' learning. But years of combat training had left Sarah with an awareness that never fully shut off. Even as she focused on teaching, part of her mind automatically processed the sounds from the hallway, the footsteps of people passing by her classroom, the rhythm of the school day around them. It was this hypervigilance that first made her notice something was wrong. At 10:45 a.m., as her students were working quietly on their reading comprehension worksheets, Sarah heard unfamiliar voices in the main hallway. They were too far away for her to make out words, but something about the tone and urgency made her pause in her grading. Then, she heard Principal Carter's voice, higher and more strained than usual. Sarah's muscles automatically tensed, though she kept her expression calm and continued moving between her students' desks. The PA system crackled to life, and Principal Carter's voice filled the classroom. But instead of the usual morning announcements, his words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "Teachers, please initiate lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill. Please move your students away from windows and doors and wait for further instructions." For a split second, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once signaled the beginning of a mission. But this wasn't Afghanistan or Iraq. This was a classroom full of 7-year-olds who were now looking at her with confused and frightened eyes. Emma started to cry, and Marcus asked in a small voice, "Miss Sarah, what's happening?" Sarah's training kicked in instantly, but it was her teaching experience that guided her response. "Okay, my brave second graders," she said in the same calm, reassuring voice she used when someone skinned a knee at recess. "We're going to play a special quiet game. I need everyone to move very quietly to our reading corner, away from the windows." As her students gathered in the carpeted area where they usually sat for story time, Sarah quickly moved to lock her classroom door and turn off the lights. She pulled down the window shades and guided her students to the safest corner of the room, behind her desk and away from the door. All of this was standard lockdown procedure, drilled into every teacher at the beginning of the school year. But Sarah's military experience told her things that the training manual didn't cover. She had noticed the sound of multiple vehicles arriving in the parking lot earlier, their engines too powerful for typical parent drop-offs. She had unconsciously registered the pattern of footsteps in the hallway, too heavy and purposeful for school staff. And now, as she strained to listen beyond her classroom walls, she could hear voices that didn't belong in an elementary school. "Miss Sarah," whispered Lily Chun, reaching for her teacher's hand. "I am scared." Sarah knelt down among her students, gathering them close like a mother hen protecting her chicks. "I know you're scared, sweetie, but I'm right here with you. We're going to stay very quiet and wait for Principal Carter to tell us everything is okay." But even as she comforted her students, Sarah's mind was racing through possibilities and contingencies. The voices in the hallway were getting closer, and she could now make out fragments of conversation. Her blood ran cold as she heard the words that no teacher ever wants to hear. "Where are the hostages?" 3 men had entered the school through the main entrance, overpowering the security guard and taking the front office staff hostage. They were armed and dangerous, with demands that had nothing to do with the school itself. Sarah would later learn that they were trying to pressure a federal judge whose granddaughter attended Millbrook Elementary. But in that moment, all she knew was that there were armed intruders in her school, and she was responsible for protecting 28 children. Sarah's SEAL training had taught her to assess threats quickly and accurately. The voices were moving systematically through the building, checking classrooms. The men were organized and had some kind of plan. This wasn't a random act of violence, but a calculated operation. That knowledge was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. Organized criminals were often more predictable than unhinged individuals. "Miss Sarah," Marcus whispered, "why are we sitting in the dark?" "We're practicing being very quiet mice," Sarah whispered back, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Can you show me how quietly a mouse can sit?" As her students played along with the impromptu game, Sarah's eyes never stopped scanning the room. She mentally cataloged everything that could be used as a weapon or shield: the heavy staplers on her desk, the wooden pointers, even the scissors in the supply closet. She calculated distances to the windows, remembered the layout of the playground equipment outside, and planned multiple escape routes. The sound of footsteps stopped outside her classroom door. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained calm as she put her finger to her lips, reminding her students to stay quiet. The door handle rattled as someone tried to open it. Then there was the sound of keys jingling. Sarah realized with growing dread that whoever was out there had taken keys from the office staff. "Kids," Sarah whispered, so quietly that she barely made any sound at all, "I need you to crawl very carefully to the supply closet. Stay low like army soldiers, okay? It's part of our game." As her students began moving toward the back of the classroom, Sarah heard the distinctive click of the lock disengaging. The door opened slowly, and harsh light from the hallway cut across the darkened classroom. Sarah positioned herself between the door and her students, her body automatically shifting into a combat stance despite her teacher clothes. A figure silhouetted in the doorway called out, "Anyone in here?" His voice was rough and impatient. Sarah could see the outline of a weapon in his hands. For a heartbeat, Sarah considered her options. She could stay hidden and hope he would leave without finding them. She could try to negotiate. Or she could do what every instinct trained into her by years of military service was screaming at her to do: neutralize the threat. But she wasn't Lieutenant Mitchell anymore. She was Miss Sarah, and she had 28 second graders counting on her to keep them safe. She made a decision that would change everything. "Please don't hurt my students," she said, stepping out from behind her desk with her hands visible but ready. "They're just children." The intruder swung his weapon toward her, and Sarah found herself staring down the barrel of an assault rifle held by a man whose eyes showed no mercy. Behind her, she could hear Emma starting to cry again and Marcus whispering, "Miss Sarah?" "Where is Judge Morrison's granddaughter?" the man demanded. "We know she goes to this school." Sarah's mind raced. She didn't know which of her students might be the judge's granddaughter, and she wouldn't tell him even if she did. "She's not in my class," she said, her voice steady despite the fear and adrenaline coursing through her system. "We'll see about that," the man said, taking a step into the classroom. "Get all those kids out where I can see them." It was in that moment that Sarah Mitchell, elementary school teacher, made the decision that Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL, had been trained for her entire military career. Sometimes, to protect the innocent, a warrior has to stand and fight. Sometimes there is no choice but to become the person you used to be, even when everything you've built depends on staying hidden. No, she said quietly, and something in her voice made the intruder pause. You're not touching these children. The man's eyes narrowed as he studied Sarah more carefully, perhaps noticing for the first time that this soft-spoken teacher wasn't cowering in fear like he had expected. Lady, you don't want to play hero here. Just do what I tell you. Behind her, Sarah could hear her students breathing, small and frightened in the darkness of the supply closet. She thought about Emma's daily hugs, Marcus's proud smile when he saw the math problem, Lily's hand reaching for comfort. These children trusted her to keep them safe. They had no idea that their teacher had once been trained to handle exactly this kind of situation. I'm not playing, Sarah said. And for the first time in 6 years, she let Lieutenant Mitchell show through Miss Sarah's gentle facade. And you're not getting past me to hurt these kids. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. Sarah's posture shifted, her breathing changed, and something dangerous flickered in her eyes. The man with the gun suddenly found himself facing not a frightened teacher, but a warrior who had survived combat in some of the world's most dangerous places. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. Sarah Mitchell smiled, and it was not the gentle smile that her students knew. It was the smile of someone who had once been considered one of the most dangerous people in the world, and who was about to remember exactly what that meant. "Someone you really don't want to mess with," she said. Last chance to walk away. The man with the assault rifle had faced down many opponents in his criminal career, but something about the woman standing before him made him hesitate. Sarah Mitchell looked like any other elementary school teacher in her cardigan and sensible shoes, but her eyes held a dangerous calm that he recognized from his time in prison. The look of someone who had killed before and would do it again without hesitation. "Look, lady," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I don't have time for games. Just get those kids out here and nobody gets hurt." Sarah didn't move. Behind her, she could hear her students whispering in the supply closet, their voices small and frightened. Emma was still crying softly, and she could hear Marcus trying to comfort the younger children. These babies who worried about spelling tests and playground arguments were now caught in a nightmare that they couldn't possibly understand. "The only person who's going to get hurt," Sarah said quietly, "is you if you don't leave this classroom right now." The intruder laughed, but it sounded forced. "You think you're tough? You think you can take on an armed man because you teach karate after school, or something?" Sarah's response was to take a single step forward, and something about the way she moved made the man's finger tighten on his weapon's trigger. Years of military training had taught her to read body language and micro-expressions, and she could see that he was nervous, uncertain, and increasingly agitated. These were exactly the conditions that made dangerous people do stupid things. "I think," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life or death command decisions, "that you have about 10 seconds to decide whether you want to walk out of here or be carried out." For a moment, the only sound in the classroom was the muffled crying of children and the distant voices of the man's accomplices searching other parts of the building. Sarah could hear them calling to each other, growing frustrated as they failed to find their target. Time was running out for all of them. The man made his decision. He swung his weapon toward the supply closet where the children were hiding. "Maybe I need to motivate you," he snarled. "How about I drag a couple of these kids out and—" He never finished the sentence. Sarah moved with a speed and precision that would have impressed her old SEAL teammates. In one fluid motion, she closed the distance between them, deflected the rifle barrel away from her students, and delivered a devastating strike to the man's throat. The weapon clattered to the floor as he gasped for air, and before he could recover, Sarah had swept his legs and driven him to the ground. Years of suppressed muscle memory flooded back as Sarah found herself in close combat for the first time since leaving the military. The man was larger and stronger than her, but he had never faced anyone with her level of training. As he struggled to regain control, Sarah used his momentum against him, applying a chokehold that cut off the blood flow to his brain. Within seconds, he was unconscious. Sarah quickly secured his weapon and checked his pockets for additional threats. She found a radio, a knife, and zip ties, the tools of someone who had come prepared for violence. Her hands moved with automatic efficiency, muscle memory taking over as she restrained the unconscious man with his own zip ties. "Miss Sarah," came a tiny voice from the supply closet. "What happened?" Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to transition back into teacher mode, even as adrenaline continued to course through her system. "Everything's okay, sweethearts. The bad man is sleeping now, and he can't hurt anyone." As she spoke, Sarah's military training was already processing their next moves. The unconscious man's radio crackled with the voices of his accomplices, growing increasingly urgent as they realized something had gone wrong. They would be coming to check on their partners soon, and Sarah had to assume they were just as armed and dangerous as he had been. She moved quickly to the windows, checking the playground and parking lot for signs of law enforcement. In the distance, she could see the flashing lights of police cars, but they were maintaining a perimeter rather than advancing on the building. Standard procedure for a hostage situation, she knew, but it meant help wouldn't be coming anytime soon. "Kids," Sarah said, kneeling by the supply closet, "I need you all to listen very carefully. We're going to play another game, but this one is super important. I need everyone to stay very quiet and do exactly what I say, okay?" 28 pairs of wide eyes stared back at her, and Sarah's heart broke a little at the trust she saw there. These children had no idea what was really happening, but they believed completely that Miss Sarah would keep them safe. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like the gear she used to carry on nighttime raids. The radio crackled again. "Tommy, what's your status? Did you find the Morrison kid?" Sarah picked up the radio, thinking quickly. She had grown up in Chicago, and years of undercover work had taught her to modify her voice and speech patterns. When she pressed the transmit button, she sounded nothing like the gentle teacher her students knew. "Yeah, I got her," she said in a rough approximation of the unconscious man's voice. "Little blonde girl, 2nd grade. Bringing her to the front office now." "Good. Hurry up. The cops are getting antsy out there." Sarah had just bought herself some time, but she knew it wouldn't last long. When a man at the front office realized she wasn't coming, they would send someone to investigate. She had to get her students out of the building before that happened. Moving to her classroom windows, Sarah examined the playground equipment outside. Her classroom was on the first floor, and the windows opened onto a section of the playground that was partially shielded from the parking lot by a large jungle gym. If she could get her students out the windows and hidden behind the equipment, they might be able to reach the fence that bordered the school property. But evacuating 28 young children through windows and across a playground without being detected would require precision timing and absolute discipline from kids who were scared and confused. It would be the most challenging mission of her military career, and the stakes had never been higher. Sarah gathered her students around her, speaking in the calm, reassuring voice they knew, even as her mind raced through tactical considerations. "Remember how we practiced fire drills? Well, we're going to do something like that, but instead of walking to the door, we're going to climb out the window like we're escaping from a castle." Some of the children looked excited at the prospect of an adventure, while others seemed more frightened. Sarah quickly identified the natural leaders among her students. Marcus, who was brave and protective of the younger kids, and Sophia, who was responsible and good at following directions. "Marcus and Sophia, you're going to be my special helpers," Sarah said. "I need you to help the other children climb out the window and then stay very quiet behind the big slide. Can you do that for me?" Both children nodded seriously, understanding that this was more than just a game. Sarah quickly opened the windows and removed the screens, then helped the first group of students climb out onto the playground. Marcus and Sophia took charge of organizing the children behind the jungle gym, whispering reminders to stay quiet and stay low. As Sarah helped more students through the windows, she kept one ear tuned to the hallway, listening for signs that the intruders were moving toward her classroom. The unconscious man at her feet was beginning to stir, and she knew she was running out of time. Emma was the last child to climb through the window, and she turned back to Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Miss Sarah, aren't you coming?" Sarah's throat tightened as she looked at the little girl who hugged her every morning and always volunteered to help clean up after our projects. "I'll be right behind you, sweetheart. I just need to make sure the bad men can't follow us." It was a lie, and Sarah hated herself for it. But she couldn't risk the lives of 28 children by leaving a conscious, armed man behind them. Someone had to stay and deal with the threat, and Sarah was the only one qualified to do it. As Emma climbed through the window to join her classmates, Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy boots, moving with purpose. The man's accomplices were coming to check on him, and they wouldn't be as easy to surprise as their partner had been. Sarah picked up the assault rifle and checked its ammunition. She had hoped never to hold a weapon like this again, had dreamed of a life where her greatest battles would be helping children learn to read and teaching them to be kind to one another. But some battles chose you, regardless of where you try to hide. The radio crackled one more time. "Tommy, where the hell are you? We're moving to the second phase." Sarah knew what that meant. These men were running out of patience, and scared criminals with weapons were the most dangerous kind. They would start hurting people soon if they didn't get what they wanted. She positioned herself behind her desk, using it as cover while maintaining a clear view of the classroom door. Through the windows, she could see her students huddled behind the playground equipment, Marcus and Sophia keeping the younger children calm, just as she had asked them to do. They were safe for now, but their safety depended on what happened in the next few minutes. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Sarah heard voices, low and urgent, as the men discussed their approach. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what they were walking into. For the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah allowed herself a small, grim smile. They were about to find out that their biggest mistake was threatening her students. Sarah Mitchell, elementary school teacher, had done everything she could to keep her children safe. Now it was time for Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL, to finish the job. The two men who entered Sarah's classroom were expecting to find their partner Tommy standing guard over a room full of terrified children. Instead, they found an empty classroom, their unconscious colleague zip-tied on the floor, and a woman behind a desk holding an assault rifle with the casual competence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. "What the hell?" one of them started to say, but Sarah cut him off. "Weapons down now," she commanded, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. "You have 3 seconds to comply." The two men exchanged glances, and Sarah could see them calculating their odds. They had numbers and surprise on their side, or so they thought. They had no idea they were facing someone who had survived firefights in Fallujah and completed hostage rescue operations in conditions that would have broken most people. "Lady, you're making a big mistake," the taller of the two men said, raising his own weapon. "Put that gun down before someone gets hurt." "Someone's going to get hurt," Sarah replied calmly. "The question is whether it's you or the innocent people you're threatening." The standoff lasted only seconds, but in Sarah's heightened state of awareness, time seemed to slow down. She could see the micro-expressions on the men's faces, could read their body language, and predict their next moves with the precision that had kept her alive through 8 years of combat deployments. The shorter man was getting ready to dive for cover behind the student desks. The taller one was preparing to open fire, his finger already tightening on the trigger. Sarah moved first. Years of training compressed into a few seconds of controlled violence. She put 2 precise shots into the tall man's center mass, dropped behind her desk as his partner returned fire, then flanked him through the reading corner while he was still trying to locate her behind the furniture. The entire engagement lasted less than 15 seconds, and when it was over, both intruders were down and no longer a threat to anyone. The classroom that had once been filled with children's laughter and learning was now a combat zone. But Sarah felt no satisfaction in the victory. She quickly checked both men for signs of life, applied pressure to wounds where she could, and called out on the radio for medical assistance. Even in combat, her military training had emphasized preserving life whenever possible, and these men would face justice for their crimes rather than dying in an elementary school classroom. As sirens wailed outside, and she heard the sound of tactical teams finally. Entering the building, Sarah allowed herself one moment to look out the window at her students. They were still huddled behind the playground equipment, Marcus and Sophia keeping the younger children calm and quiet just as she had asked. They were safe. They were all safe. The next few hours passed in a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, and debriefings with federal agents. Sarah found herself in the strange position of explaining to law enforcement officers how a second-grade teacher had single-handedly neutralized 3 armed intruders and evacuated nearly 30 children without a single casualty. "Ma'am," said Detective Rodriguez, reviewing her statement for the 3rd time, "you said you used to serve in the Navy?" "Yes," Sarah replied simply. She had decided that the time for complete secrecy was over, but she still wasn't ready to reveal the full extent of her military background. "What was your role in the Navy?" Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I did whatever my country asked me to do." The detective clearly wanted more details, but before he could press further, Principal Carter appeared in the doorway of the conference room where they had been talking. His face was pale, but relieved, and his eyes filled with tears when he saw Sarah. "The children are asking for you," he said. "Their parents are here to pick them up, and they want to make sure you're okay." Sarah's composure, which had held steady through combat and questioning, finally cracked. The thought of facing her students and their families, of having to explain what had happened, was more terrifying than anything she had encountered in her military career. "I don't know what to tell them," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Principal Carter sat down across from her. "Tell them the truth, Sarah. Tell them they're safe because they had the bravest teacher in the world." When Sarah finally made it to the gymnasium where the children were reuniting with their families, she was overwhelmed by what she found. Instead of fear or suspicion, she was greeted with tears of gratitude and relief. Parents who had barely spoken to her before were hugging her and thanking her for saving their children's lives. But it was her students' reactions that affected her most deeply. Emma ran to her and wrapped her arms around Sarah's waist, looking up with the same trusting eyes she had always had. Marcus stood a little straighter and saluted her with the seriousness that only a 7-year-old could muster. Sophia handed her a drawing she had made while waiting for her parents. A picture of Miss Sarah standing protectively in front of a group of children, with the words "My hero teacher" written in careful 2nd-grade handwriting. "Miss Sarah," Emma asked, "are you really a soldier?" Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level, acutely aware that her answer would shape how this little girl viewed the world and the people in it. "I used to be a soldier," she said carefully. "But now I'm your teacher, and being your teacher is the most important job I've ever had." "Did being a soldier help you protect us?" Marcus wanted to know. "Yes," Sarah said honestly. "It did. But you know what helped me even more? Knowing how special and brave each one of you is. You all followed directions and took care of each other, and that's what kept everyone safe." The questions continued for another hour as parents and children processed what had happened. Sarah found herself sharing more about her military service than she had ever intended, but she discovered that the truth was less frightening than she had anticipated. These people weren't looking at her differently because she had been a soldier. They were looking at her with even more respect because she had chosen to use her skills and training to protect children. Later that evening, after the last family had gone home and the school was finally quiet, Sarah sat alone in her damaged classroom. Maintenance crews would spend the next several days repairing the walls and replacing the furniture, but the emotional healing would take much longer. She had crossed a line today that she could never uncross, had become someone she thought she had left behind forever. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she found a simple message. "Heard you had some excitement today. Proud of you, shipmate. Chief Morrison." Sarah smiled despite everything. News traveled fast in the military community, even among people who were supposed to have never existed. Chief Morrison had been her team leader during her last deployment, and somehow he had heard about what happened in Millbrook. The fact that he was proud of her meant more than all the official recognition she might receive. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's story spread far beyond her small Colorado town. News outlets picked up the story of the teacher who had been revealed as a Navy SEAL veteran, and she found herself fielding interview requests from national media. She declined most of them, preferring to maintain as much privacy as possible, but she did agree to a few interviews when she realized that her story might inspire other veterans struggling with the transition to civilian life. The school district offered her a commendation and a promotion, but Sarah turned both down. She wanted to stay in her classroom with her students, to continue doing the work that had given her life meaning and purpose. The children needed stability and normalcy after their traumatic experience, and she was determined to provide it for them. When classes resumed the following week, Sarah was amazed by how quickly her students adapted. Children were remarkably resilient. She had learned, and with the support of counselors and their families, most of them were able to process what had happened and move forward. They still called her Miss Sarah, still brought her pictures they had drawn at home, still lined up for hugs at the end of each school day. But there were changes too. Marcus had started a campaign to collect care packages for deployed military personnel, inspired by learning about Miss Sarah's service. Emma had written a letter to the president, suggesting that all teachers should be taught to protect their students the way Miss Sarah had protected them. Sophia had decided she wanted to be a soldier when she grew up, so she could help people the way her teacher had helped them. The other children in the school treated Sarah's students like celebrities for a while, eager to hear their first-hand account of what had happened. But as the weeks passed and the media attention died down, life at Millbrook Elementary gradually returned to something approaching normal. Sarah continued her daily runs through the mountains, but now she occasionally encountered other runners who recognized her and wanted to thank her for her service. She began volunteering at the local veterans organization, helping other former military personnel navigate the challenges of civilian life. She discovered that sharing her story carefully and selectively could help other people who were struggling with similar transitions. Most importantly, she found peace with the integration of her two identities. She was no longer hiding Lieutenant Mitchell behind Miss Sarah's gentle facade. She was one person, a veteran who had served her country with honor and was now serving her community in a different but equally important way. 6 months after the incident, Sarah received a letter that changed everything once again. It was from the Department of the Navy, informing her that she was being recalled to active duty for a special assignment. They wanted her to help develop training programs for military personnel transitioning to careers in education. It was an opportunity to serve her country once again while staying connected to the field of teaching that had become her passion. Sarah read the letter 3 times before making her decision. Then, she walked into her classroom where her students were working quietly on their math assignments, and she smiled. Some battles chose you, she had learned, but sometimes you were fortunate enough to choose battles that were worth fighting. Miss Sarah, Emma called out, "Can you help me with this problem?" "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah replied, moving to kneel beside Emma's desk. "That's what I'm here for." As she helped Emma work through the subtraction problem, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed and how much it had stayed the same. She was still protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. She was still fighting for something bigger than herself. And she was still, first and foremost, someone who believed that every person deserved to feel safe and valued and loved. The letter from the Navy could wait until after school. Right now, 28 second graders needed their teacher, and Miss Sarah had work to do.